Hi everyone, this is Attorney Lilian with Lily Legal, and today is Immigration Chat with me. So I'm going to do things a little differently today. I'm going to start with some updates because some amazing news came out in the last week or so. So I'm going to start with that, and then we're going to get into the topic of today, which is how and when you can apply for citizenship once you have your green card, right? What are the requirements? How long do you have to wait? All of that we will cover today. But first, I just want to start with the updates, right? There are some amazing updates for people from Haiti, for example, and then for US citizens that are stuck abroad, there's some updates for you as well. So let's get into this. So the first update is for Haitian citizens and nationals. So this update is that they can now apply for TPS. So if a Haitian national has been in the US as of May 21st, 2021, right? So this is for people that are already in the US. You can apply for TPS, temporary protected status. This basically gives you the ability, right? The ability to apply for work authorization and to remain in the US without fear of deportation. Okay, so if you fit into this category, I will do a whole separate video on TPS, how to qualify, what documentations you will need to show that you've been in the US and all of that. We will cover that in a completely separate video, but I just wanted to let you know that if you or someone you know is from Haiti and they are in the US without documentation, they are now eligible for TPS if they have been here since May 21st, 2021. Okay, so that is some amazing news that came out within the last week. Okay, the next news that I wanted to cover is for people that are US citizens stuck abroad because their passport has expired and the embassy, the US embassy in the country they're in is not open, right? If you are in this situation, well, I have some great news for you. You can travel to the US with your expired passport. So this is something new. Before, you will need to go to the embassy, renew your passport before you'll be able to travel into the US. But that requirement is being waived for US citizens that are stuck abroad due to COVID and their passport is expired. So if you are in this situation, you are able to travel back to the US with your expired passport. Okay, so the next update for people that have immigration interviews in the US. Unfortunately, the embassies in certain countries are still closed and still only or handling limited amount of cases, right? So if you are not, in most countries, if you are not an immediate relative of a US citizen, so that is spouse, children under 21, or parent, the chances of you getting an interview is greatly reduced because they're not handling those at this moment. Okay, so, but there's hope because as things, as more countries get the vaccine and the number of people with COVID reduces in those countries, the embassy will be more likely to open. So we are hopeful and looking forward to those opening so that anyone that has their application pending and just stuck because they haven't had an interview will be able to get those interviews and be able to come into the US. Now, if you are in the US and you're applying for citizenship, a green card, whatever it is that requires an interview, this update is for you. Because of the new CDC guidelines on masks and all of that, the USCIS has updated their guidelines. So before, you would have to wear a mask and a whole lot of CDC requirements, right? So now they're moving their guidelines to line up with the CDC. So that is great for people that are already vaccinated. You will not have to wear a mask when you are in the at your USCIS interview. If you are not already vaccinated, you are still required to wear a mask. Okay, so those are the quick updates, and then we are going to get into how you can apply for citizenship, what you need, what are the requirements, and how to go about the whole thing. So first, I just want to say hi to Faith. Hi, Faith. Welcome, as always. And I want to just give a quick shout out to Peace TV for always airing my lives on their page. Feel free to please give some love to Peace TV. And if you're watching on Peace TV, hi, welcome. And feel free to like my page and subscribe to my YouTube channel, because we provide a lot of immigration updates and information that will help you or someone you know in their immigration journey. Okay, so first thing first, you have to apply for citizenship, naturalization in the US after you have your green card, you have to be at least 18 years old. Okay, that's number one. Number two, you must live in the US. Yeah. Right. So that's the second requirement, is that you have to, the US has to be your permanent home. Permanent home for the past 5 years. Now, does that mean you can't travel? No. It does not mean that you can't travel outside of the US, but it does mean that you have to limit your time away from the US. So you have to have at least 30 months in the US, physically in the US, within the past 5 years. Okay, let me repeat that. 30 months within the US within the past 5 years before you're applying. And then if you are the spouse of a US citizen and you received your green card through your US citizen spouse, that would be 3 years. Okay, so that's one of the benefits of gaining your citizenship through marriage to a US citizen, is that if you have your green card through your marriage, you will be able to apply for citizenship in 3 years instead of the typical 5 years. If you get divorced in the process, you know, depending on your situation, you most likely will have to wait for the 5 years. But if you are still married, 3 years. Okay. You must be able to read, write, and speak basic English. So this is another requirement that especially my older immigrant clients might not be able to meet. However, there are exceptions to the rule, and I will go over those exceptions, but I just want to go over the general rules first. Okay. Okay, so I have a question from Christina. She says, is it 3 years since the day you received your green card? Yes. So when you get your green card, you look at the date on it, the receive date, right? That date is what you're looking at for the 3 years or the 5 years. Not when you applied, not when you got married. You're looking at that when you actually received the green card. That's when you start counting the 3 years or the 5 years. Okay, that's a great question. Thank you, Christina. So once you get over the read, write, and speak English, the next requirement is that you have to know US history and government, right? You need to know the civics. Who's the president? What does the Constitution stand for? So all those things you will need to know. Again, there's small exceptions that I will go over, but you are required to know some civics about the US. And you must have good moral character. So what does this actually mean in reality? It means that you pay your taxes, you don't owe the IRS any taxes, right? And if you do owe taxes, that you have a payment plan. So I usually get people that are so concerned that because they owe taxes to the IRS, that's not fully paid yet, that they're not able to apply. But the requirement is that if you, so basically what I do for my clients is if you have a payment plan, we just need to get proof of your payment plan to show that although you owe the IRS, right, you are making good on your promise to make your monthly payments to them. So that covers that good moral character of, even though you owe the back taxes, you're still a person of good moral character because you are taking the steps to make good on your debt. Okay. Another big one that comes up in this good moral character, there's a huge one, but this is another big one, is child support. Okay, if you owe back child support and you're not making any payments towards it, that's a problem. That's a big problem. So again, if you have a payment plan, if your wages are being garnished, whatever way that you're paying, you need to be able to show that if there is a child support order, that you're actually paying it. Okay, so that's now the big one. The big one is criminal history. Okay, if you have a criminal history, it doesn't automatically mean that you don't qualify for citizenship. It's just we would need to have a conversation and pull all your records and look at it and make sure it's not something that's going to make you inadmissible or deportable. So there's certain crimes that will make someone inadmissible. So when you're applying for citizenship, you are technically asking for admission as a citizen. So all the different requirements for admission will apply to you. So if you happen to get any criminal records after you get your green card, we will need to look at those to just make sure it wouldn't be an issue for you to be able to apply for citizenship. Okay. But again, like I said, not every single interaction with the police or every single arrest or anything like that will lead to you not being able to apply for citizenship. But that's a very specific conversation that will need to be had before you apply for citizenship, because you don't want to be in a situation where you apply for citizenship and not only are you inadmissible because of the crime, you're also deportable, meaning they can put you in immigration court proceedings to basically start the process of trying to get you out of the US. Okay, so you really want to be careful if you have a criminal history to really have that conversation first before you go ahead and file. Okay, and then you have to swear that you support the Constitution of the United States. You have to take the oath of allegiance. If you have any foreign titles, right? If you're a king or anything like that, you have to be willing to give up that title. That's a big one for people in nobility, because they might not want to give up that title. And if you do not, it's a question on the application, right? It's a clear question on the application. And if you're not willing to give up your nobility title, you might not be able to gain citizenship. So then just stay a green card holder, renew your green card, and maintain your residence in the US. That's really all you can do at that point if you're not willing to say yes to some of these questions when it comes to the oath of allegiance. When it comes to the question about bearing arms, if you have any religious reasons, right, for why, if you're a pacifist or anything like that, you can present evidence of that in order to still get your citizenship without answering yes to that question. But it is Those questions are typically a yes for most people because they are willing to do basically whatever is required by the US government for them to gain their citizenship. Now, I talked about, so I just want to stop here and ask if anyone has a question. Please feel free. If you are still with me and what I'm saying is making sense to you, please feel free to just put a yes in the comments just so I know I haven't lost you yet. And that I can go to the next thing that I want to cover. And if you have any questions about what I've already covered or any other immigration questions, please feel free to ask. That's what this moment is really about. I want to make sure that you understand what you need. And then if you have any questions, you're asking, okay? Oh, thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Christina. I'm glad that you are following, and I am, like Nikki said, I am on point. I am very, very glad to hear that. Okay, so like I said earlier, there are exceptions to people being able to speak basic English, right? Read and write English. There are exceptions to those to that rule, but you have to meet a certain requirement in order to skip those questions or to get a simplified civics test. So the first thing, one of the exceptions is the 50-20 rule or the 55-15 rule. So the 50-20 rule is that you are 50 years old or older and you've had your green card for 20 years. Okay? The 55-15 rule is that you're 55 years old or older and you've had your green card for 15 years. Okay, so those are the top exceptions. And then there is an extra one for people that are 65 years old or older and have had their green card for at least 20 years. Okay, so not only do you get to skip, so if you're 65, if you're in the 65-20 rule, right, 65 years old or older, 20 years as a green card, you get to skip the English part and you get the reduced civics part. Okay, you get to take the reduced test, and because you don't have to know basic English, you can actually take the test in your language if you don't speak any English. Okay, so that is a very special thing for people that are 65 years or older and are and have had their green card for 20 years. Now, if you are part of the 50-20 or 55-15 rule, that only applies to the English part, not the civics. Okay, you must still take the full civics. You can just the only difference is now you can take it in your language. You don't have to take it in English. Okay, let me repeat that. If you are in the 50-20 rule or 55-15, you can skip the English language requirement, but you still have to meet the civics. So the full civics test, you still have to take that. But if you are in the 65-20 exception, you get to not only skip the English, you also get the reduced civics, which is like 5 questions out of 20. So it's very reduced. Everyone else is studying like 100 questions, and they have to get a lot more right. Okay, so you really want to make sure that if you fit into any of these rules, that you are basically checking off the right boxes so that you, when you get to your interview, the officer knows, okay, you're saying that you fit into this rule. This is how the test is going to be handled. Okay, and if you are almost at the 55-15 or the 65-20 and you want to wait until you meet those requirements in order to apply for citizenship, that's a decision you have to make. I have had people in that situation, and they chose to wait because they just couldn't go through the process of learning a whole new language or getting to the point where they can read and write basic English. Okay, so it is okay to wait depending on your particular situation. Okay, so another exception in this whole, like I said, there's a bunch of exceptions, and this is another exception to the English reading and writing part and the civics. So this exception is the medical disability exception. So basically, a medical doctor, your doctor, has to fill out a form and basically say why you can't learn English, if you have any medical conditions. So I've had people that have had a stroke and we're not able to be verbal. That is an exception, that can lead to you being able to get your citizenship and skip the English part and the civics part. Okay, so depending on your particular medical condition, you might be able to skip certain parts of the test. The medical disability exception is a very, very specific thing. Your doctor has to put very specific language in the forms in order for you to qualify for this exception. So if you meet the exception, you get to skip the English part and the civics. So this is a great exception for someone that wants to apply for citizenship, but they are worried because they have an extreme learning disability or anything like any serious medical conditions that make it impossible for them to learn a new language. This is an exception that with the help of their medical doctor, they are able to fill out the form and get a whole and be able to apply for citizenship. Okay, so that is the exception for the English reading and writing and the civics part. Now, I want to then cover what you have to actually do, right? What type of information do you need for the forms? And this is where people usually, this is where I usually lose people. So feel free to ask questions in the comments. Feel free to, tell me you're still with me. But I'm going to go over the type of information you will need for the forms. So the first thing is you'll need your personal information, of course, as always. If you have went through the green card process, you should be used to this by now, okay? You have to provide information on yourself, your spouse, your children, your parents, right? If your parents are US citizens, you have to provide that information. But if they're not, you might be able to skip the parents part. But your spouse, previous spouse, you really have to remember, guys. You really have to remember if you've been married before, but now you're divorced, you need to remember that because the forms will ask for it. If you are currently married and your spouse was married before, you need that information as well. So not just your previous marriages, but your spouse's previous marriages are important in your application process. So just know that information is required. And then your children. And by children, I mean children, all of them. Doesn't matter if they are married, doesn't matter if they are over 21, it doesn't matter. If they are your children, you should be including them. It doesn't matter if they are not in the US or have no plans of ever coming to the US, they're still your children. So the form asks for your children anywhere in the world. So include them here. And then if you've had any arrests, right? If you've had any convictions, anything like that, you will need to disclose that on your form. And it's explicitly asks for this. So this is not a maybe. Okay, this is the form asks, have you ever been arrested, cited, had interaction with the police? You should be including that. You should be including everything. Okay, some of the things you include might not be a big deal. It might not be a big deal, but you should include it. Okay, so Nikki has a question. I'm just gonna, okay. Does this include your spouse's children too? Yes, so if they are your stepchildren, I still say include them, right? It does not hurt you to include your spouse's children if they are your stepchildren. I always err on the side of provide as much information as possible than not. You don't want to get to the interview and the officer asks you if your spouse has any children, because I've had that happen. And then now they have to update the forms. So go ahead and include it. And then when you get to the interview and they ask you, you know, your children, you list, okay, these are my biological, these are my stepchildren, right? It's really that easy. So they're not, it's not a big deal to include them. So go ahead and do that. Thank you for the question, Nikki. Let's see. You will also have to include everywhere you have worked for the past 5 years. And I mean everywhere. Okay. Even if you only work somewhere for 2 months, I still say include it, because they probably send you a W-2 or a 1099, which is filed with the IRS. So include it. Everywhere you have lived for the last 5 years. Okay, that is a big requirement, and people try to, people forget, or they think it doesn't matter. Oh, it's been so long ago. Include everywhere you have lived for the past 5 years. Even if, like I said, you only lived there for 6 months or less, I would say if you consider that your residence, you should be including it. Okay. If you filled out a form and, if while you were living there, you filled out a form and they asked for your address and that's the address you put down, that's your residence. Okay. So make sure you include all of that. And then the last thing that I want to cover is where you traveled for the past 5 years. Okay, this is a big deal. This is non-negotiable. You have to remember every time you have been outside the US, where you went, how long, to the, not like, oh, I was out for maybe 2 weeks. No, how many days did you actually spend outside of the US? So this is very important because this is how they're going to calculate if you meet the 30 months requirement, right? If you've been in the US, physically in the US for 30 months of the past 5 years, right? So for them to do that math, they need to know how many days you have been physically outside of the US. And this is also where they look to see if they can say that you abandoned your green card. So it's really important that once you have your green card, you make sure that you are in the US for the majority of the year. You are not out long enough for someone to question whether you are, a US resident or if you are a resident of your home country. Okay, so this is where all of that matters. If you have a green card and you take a trip and then, you get sick and you had to be outside of the US for more than 6 months, that's fine because you have a reason for being outside of the US. However, if you leave the US and you're like, oh, I'm just going to stay in this other country for 7 or 8 months and start working there and basically start building a life outside of the US, that's going to raise some concerns when you go to apply for citizenship, because now you are opening yourself up to the question of whether you abandoned your residency in the U.S. So this is a very important question that comes up a lot that comes up on the forms, and then at the interview, if you have not met the requirements, the officer has to, right? If you have not met the 30 months in the US, the officer has to deny your application, not maybe. So that's why the calculation of knowing exactly how many days you've been in the US, how many days you were outside of the US, even if it's a short trip to Canada, you need to include that in your calculations, okay? Because they really need to know down to the details where you were, so that they can calculate this. You do not want your application to be denied because you missed a month, right? You really don't want that. So I do this deep calculations with my clients before we send out your applications, so that we do not run into that at your interview, because then you just have to start over. There's nothing the officer can do at that point if you don't meet the requirements. So these are not things, whether you have good moral character or not, right? Whether the officer is going to approve you, even though you have child support, that's something in the officer's discretion. But whether you meet the 30 months in the US, that's something that's actual law, right? That's an actual legal requirement for you to get citizenship. So as much as I like to tell you, there's certain things that we can figure out, that's not one of them. Okay, so we need to, while you're going through this process, it's really important that you know how long you've been out of the US. Okay, so, and thank you, Christina. I'm glad you're still following me on this. And like I said before, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments. If you're watching this on the replay, hi, welcome. And feel free to ask me your questions as well. I do go back and check the questions and answer them. So feel free to do that. And then depending on your questions, I might turn it into a Tuesday tips video where I answer your questions in a short video. So feel free to ask me all your questions. Okay. And then I just want to go back and kind of do a little more dive into the good moral character, because I know that's something that is, like I said, is discretionary, right? You must have good moral character is what it says in the law, but what it actually means can be up to the officer, right? If you don't have any criminal history, if you don't owe back child support, if you are even, right? So this is something that happened with a client of mine, and I always want to make sure people understand where an officer is going when they ask you questions, especially about your children. So during the interview, the officer was basically asking, what happened, how many children do you have? Do you take care of your children? All these questions. And it's like, yeah, of course I take care of my kids, but because there was no court order, right? There's nothing from the court saying that he has to pay child support. The officer was like, I don't really know if you're taking care of your kids because you have more than two. I don't know. You're not showing me proof that you're taking care of your kids. So we had to send the officer proof that he's taking care of his kids, even though there's no court order saying that he has to pay child support. So just because you don't have a court order saying that you have to pay child support doesn't mean that the officer will not ask you how you're taking care of your kids or if you're taking care of your kids. Okay, so you have to be prepared for that. So now I make sure if you have kids, whether there's a court order or not, we need proof that you're taking care of them. That's very important. So I just wanted to put that in there for people that have kids, but they're not in court, right? There's no child support, there's nothing. You still have to show that you're taking care of your kids, especially if your kids are in the US. Because the officer sees it as, if you are not taking care of your kids, that means the US government might be the ones helping to take care of your kids, which of course we don't want. So again, it's really important that you are aware of these little things that people talk about. Oh, you owe back child support. But even if you don't owe back child support, are you still taking care of your kids financially? That's still important. Okay. So I just want to do a quick overview of citizenship, what you need to know, what you must do, and the information you need to have on hand when you're ready to file for citizenship. So you must be 18 years old or older to apply for citizenship. You must have had your green card for 5 years or 3 years, depending on if you got your green card through marriage. And you have to physically be present in the US for at least 5 years. So that's physical presence in the US for at least 30 months of the 5 years. Okay, so even if, like I said before, even if you're spending some time outside of the US, do you still have a job in the US? Do you still have a residence in the US? So that if that question comes up, you can show that, hey, I still had a job waiting for me when I came back. I still had my family in the US. I was not abandoning my residency in the US by staying out for more than 6 months. Okay, so that's a requirement. You must be able to read, write, and speak basic English, unless you fit into the exceptions of the 50-20 rule, the 55-15 rule, or the 65-20 rule. So if you fit into any of those exceptions, especially the 55-15, the 50-20, you will be able to skip the English part, but you'll still have to do the civics, and you can take the civics part in your language. If you are in the 65-20 rule, you'll skip the English and you get a reduced civics part. If you have a medical disability that makes it impossible for you to learn a new language or to learn the civics, if you have a memory issue, things like that, your doctor can fill out a form meeting all the requirements. The officer will then determine if you meet the requirements. And if you do, you'll be able to skip the English part and the civics part. Okay? And then you must, like I said, the civics part, you must have fundamental knowledge of US history and government. Okay? And for that, just a quick thing, you need to know who your governor is, right? You need to know what the Constitution stands for, who the president is. It's really, there's a lot of questions, but you just need to know the basics. It's nothing too fanciful. You don't need, degrees to get this, okay? You must have good moral character. That means no criminal history that does not affect your ability to apply for citizenship. You don't owe back child support. You don't owe the IRS. You're taking care of your kids. And if you do owe the IRS, you are on a payment plan and you are making payments. Okay? And you must swear. You have to take the oath of allegiance and, believe in the Constitution of the United States. If you do all of that, if you fit into all of that, you can apply for citizenship. Now, when you are going to apply, you need the following information. Okay, this is required information on the forms. Your personal information about you, your parents, your spouse, your children. If your spouse was married before, you need their previous spouse's information. If you were married before, you need your previous spouse's information. If you have children, you need to include all your children, no matter if they're in the US, if they're married, if they're over 21, your children, including step children. Okay. If you have been arrested or cited, you need to include all of that information. You have to include where you've worked for the past 5 years. So this is even if it was a 1 month, 2 months that you worked there, you have to include that. Where you have lived for the past 5 years, you need to include that as well. And then finally, where you have traveled, right? And how many days you have been outside of the US. This is a very important requirement because it helps the officer determine whether you meet the 30 months in the US rule. Okay, so those are the requirements. Now I'm going to go into a little bit what happens or what you should expect at your interview, and then we'll wrap this up. Okay, so during your interview, the way that they're doing things now, first you come in, the officer swears you in, you're under oath, you sit, and then you get into it. The officer will most likely start with the civics and the English part, just to get it out of the way. Because if you fail that, like they can go through your entire application with you, but they'll give you another chance to come back and take the civics or the English part. Okay, so they start with that, go through the English, have you write a sentence. So I've had like a question might be like you read the question, where is the US capital, right? And then you write the US capital is in Washington, D.C. Okay, so it can be something as simple as that. So just know you will have to not only read it, write it, and you're speaking it with the officer so the officer can gauge your level of understanding of the English language. Okay. And then once that's done, the officer goes through the forms that you filed. So they will go over your N400 application, ask you all the questions, like I said, where you've lived, where you've worked, when you've been outside of the US, your children, your family, they'll go through all of that with you. Now, depending on how you got your green card, this is a big deal. Depending on how you got your green card, especially if you got your green card through marriage and you are no longer married, or you're still married, but you're no longer together, the officer is going to ask you questions about your previous marriage. The officer is going to ask you questions about the marriage through which you got your green card. They're going to. This is not a hidden thing. This is just facts. If you got your green card through marriage, the officer is going to ask you about that marriage. They're going to ask you about your spouse. They're going to ask you where you lived, what if you had any accounts together. And again, the more honest you are with your entire immigration history, the less likely you are to have any issues during your citizenship. This is where they are able to kind of catch people that might have not really known their spouse well, or might have gotten married to get a green card, and then once they got their green card, they left the person. So the officer is asking you these questions to gauge whether you really knew the person that you got your green card through. So just so that the first time you're not hearing those questions is not in front of the officer, I want to give you that little tip right there is if you got married and you got your green card through that marriage, now that you're applying for citizenship, just be ready to be asked questions about that marriage and the information that you had on your forms while you're applying for your green card. Okay, so that is the show for today. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments. We still have a few minutes here, so feel free to hit me with the questions. If there are no questions, we can end this for today. As always, I am here every Friday at 12 o'clock Eastern Standard Time to bring you some immigration information, and we're going to continue chatting. I want to thank everyone that has joined me today. This was great. I really appreciate you all asking your questions and responding and just letting me know that you are following me as I'm going through this information. As always, if you want to have a meeting with me personally, you can do so. My information will be in the description. And if you are not following me on my page, Lily Legal, please feel free to do that. And also in the description, you see all my social media handles, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Please feel free to subscribe. We will be putting some additional videos up on the YouTube channel. So feel free to like and subscribe over there. And thank you so much for joining me. And I will see you next week, Friday. Bye for now. Have a great one.